Hello, today I am gonna sculpt the face using this little ball of clay. And you might be thinking, is there something special about that ball of clay? Well, no. And with that out of the way, today I'm gonna take a deep dive into the world of sculpting faces. You know, I really wanna get into the nitty-gritty details of what it takes to create a beautiful face. Is it perhaps the stare in those mysterious eyes? Or is it perhaps that fabulous smile? Well, I ain't got no clue about that. But what I do know is that this video isn't exactly just about sculpting beautiful faces. So the plan is to make a diorama of a little wizard who's out and about in a blood-red desert of sorts, when all of a sudden he finds himself standing right in front of a rock wall with a big gate and thinking, I wonder what's on the other side. The wizard also got a horse with him, and the horse knows that whenever the wizard says, I wonder what's on the other side, then things usually go haywire. And after a couple of abracadabras, open sesame and other words of that nature, the gate opens up, releasing a monstrosity so vile it could only be described as the embodiment of a comment section on the platform X, more commonly known as Twitter. And since I wanted the monster to be comprised of a bunch of faces, I sculpted a bunch of faces in different shapes and sizes. But of course a bunch of random faces isn't all that scary. No, I still had to put each and every face through what I like to call the process. When all the faces had been properly processed, then it was just a question of piecing them together one by one. And when all of them had been put into place, I still felt like there was something missing. I knew I could make it look a bit more spooky. So I rolled out a little ball of clay before cutting the clay rope into a couple of smaller pieces that I once more rolled a bit more to make the ends a little thinner. And then attaching the freshly made tentacle armor things in the crevices between the faces. And the moral of the story is, everything becomes a bit more spooky with tentacles. So if you're ever in doubt, try tentacles. And once baked in the oven, the tentacle monster was done, and it was time to make a base. I started by cutting out a circle out of some XPS foam that would become the base for the diorama, but only using a knife wasn't enough to make the sides as smooth as I wanted them to be. So I took it outside and sanded it to make sure I wouldn't be the only one inhaling cancerous foam particles. Because you know, sharing is caring. Then I glued together two chunkier pieces of XPS foam, creating one extra chunky piece that would become the rock wall. I drew an outline of the curvature of the base before removing all the excess foam until the two foam pieces lined up somewhat properly with each other. The front side of the wall was given the good old poke with my plier and slice with my knife technique until something remotely rock looking is starting to appear. And when I was happy with how the rock was starting to look, then I added some PVA glue in the middle of the arch before attaching the tentacle monster to it. When the glue had dried, then the wall was almost done, but I still needed to make some doors for the gate, so I took two small rectangular pieces of XPS foam and drew a half-arch shape on them that I cut away before giving the door some texture with a crumpled up piece of aluminum foil. Then the doors were attached on each side of the opening, before gluing the entire rock wall into place. I figured the diorama could use some more tentacles, because why not? So I made two bigger ones off camera and attached one at the bottom and the other one at the top. I added some quick drying putty to the wall, mainly to cover the seam between the two pieces of XPS foam, but then figured I might as well just cover the entire thing with it. I whipped together a little batch of plaster for the ground, but before applying it I had to make sure the consistency was right. Then I smeared it all over the base in a couple of layers to build up some thickness. And before the plaster had dried, I kept on pushing and poking it around to make sure I was happy with the texture on the ground. Because I didn't want too much texture, but not too little, but not too much, but not too little. Lastly, I wrapped the sides of the base with some wood veneer, and when that was done, then the base was finished. Alright, looking kind of nice. Next up on the agenda is to make a little wizard. Since I wanted the gate to look big and menacing, I realized that I would have to make the wizard much smaller than I first had anticipated, and I've sculpted some small models before, but never this small, I don't think. Since I'm personally a big fan of straight up generic fantasy, I didn't feel like overcomplicating the design too much. Just go for the old man with a staff and a long beard in some rag-taggedy robes, I guess. You know, like this dude. I wrapped a little belt around the waist of the wizard before giving him some delightfully oversized sleeves, and when those were done, I attached a cloak on the wizard's back that I gave the appearance of being lifted by the wind. Then the body and the clothing was done, so it was time to make a head. And you better believe that making a face the size of a needle pin made my hands a little extra sweaty. But fortunately, we're making a generic wizard, and about 50% of a generic wizard's face tend to be covered up with some scruffy old beard. And if that wasn't enough, I also gave him some dirty old hair, but left a pretty nice landing pad on top of the dome. This little wizard is almost striking that "you shall not pass" pose, but at the moment he's more like striking the "ain't got no hands" pose. But once I finally managed to get the right hand in place, then I glued on a little brass rod to the left arm, because you better believe that I'm giving the wizard a staff. And once I'd wrapped some fiddly-diddly details around it, as well as adding a tiny ball on top of the bigger ball, then the wizard was done. Just look at him go. As previously mentioned, the wizard isn't hanging around the gate all by himself. No, the wizard's got a horse friend with him, but at first I was thinking about giving him a donkey friend. However, I've never sculpted a donkey before, or a horse either for that matter. And in all honesty, I've mistaken a donkey for a horse before, so I felt like, you know what, whatever happens, happens. And after a while of poking around the clay, trying to get the general shape right, it became clear that if this is a donkey, then this is a very majestic donkey. So my guess is I'm making a horse. I added some extra pieces of hair on the horse's neck before poking some individual strands of hair on the mane, as well as attaching a longer piece of clay as a tail that I used my knife on to make it look a bit more like hair. A little blanket was placed on the back of the horse, as well as a rolled up rug, and lastly some reins attached on each side of the mouth. And then the horse-wizard duo was done, as well as the base. So you know what time it is. It is time to paint. I started off by base coating the tentacle monster with a very dark brownish red color. Then a rock wall got painted with a couple of different shades of browns that I wet blended together to get some natural transitions, and since the gate itself is made out of rock, I painted it with the same colors. And the final base coat was a couple of layers of a dark wine red color I covered the entire ground with. I wanted the overall look of the monster to be quite dark and menacing as it reaches out from within the gate, so I painted it with a fair amount of watered down layers of red highlight, just making sure that each layer had dried properly before applying the next. I painted all the eyeballs on all the individual faces with a pure white to try and maximize the spookiness of the monster. Then I dry brushed some orangey brown highlights onto the rock wall, keeping the brightest highlights to the top of the wall to give the diorama a little bit of a sunset ambience, because I mean, who wouldn't want to enjoy the sunset with these dudes? The ground was given some red highlights, and I don't know if I would say that the ground really reads as a red desert, which was the original plan, but I think it looks kinda cool anyway. To finish up the wall, I added some splashes of a brown wash here and there on the rocks for good measure. And then the final thing to do before the base was done was to paint all of the wood veneer as well as the exposed foam with some black paint. Alright, then the base was done and it was on to painting the horse. I started by painting the horse with a light brown base coat before painting the mane and the tail with a darker brown. Then painting the blanket on the horse's back purple before painting some highlights onto the horse to make it look a bit more light beige. Then back to painting some more details on the blanket, as well as painting up the rolled up rug with some green. And when I was done painting up the horse, I realized that the eyes isn't exactly on the same latitude. Well, not much I can do about that now. Anyway, since I used purple and green for the details on the horse, I figured why not use the same color selection for the wizard, you know, to really sell the idea that the wizard and the somewhat wonky horse are partners in crime. I painted on some more base colors on the face as well as the beard, before it was time to add some details. And I started with building up the skin tone with some highlights, before dry brushing some off-white onto the beard and the hair. Then adding some light purple on all of the raised areas of the cloak, and also giving the cloak some edge highlight. And the same principle was used for all the other clothing as well, only painting it green instead of purple, of course. I painted the spire part of the staff gold, and then the wizard was almost done. But of course I couldn't help myself but to make a little wizard's hat off camera, just as a final detail for the diorama. And as I'm painting up that, I just want to take the time and say thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. I hope you liked it. So until the next time, be kind to yourself and others around you. And without any further ado, here are the final results.